Mom didn't wait for the room to breathe. She raised her glass in front of the whole Thanksgiving table and delivered a line so precise it carved straight through the chatter. She declared Emily would receive the insurance payout because I had no need for it. No whisper, no softening. Just a public sentence dropped on my head like I was some distant relative instead of her firstborn. Chairs froze. Voices cut off mid-thought. Even the candles on the table seemed to pull back. I kept my expression steady, but inside something finally clicked into place. Before I walk you into that exact second, tell me where you're watching from. And once you hear the rest, tell me what you would have done in my shoes. My name is Chloe, and as far back as my memory goes, I learned to move quietly through rooms that should have felt like mine. Not out of shyness, but because silence lets you notice everything people believe you won't catch. It's a skill you develop growing up with a mother like mine, someone who loves control as much as she worships my younger sister Emily. Emily, if it isn't already clear, is the center of her universe. 2 years younger than me, sweet when she chooses, and a bit delicate after her recent divorce. Right now she's living with Mom again. Every choice in that house is calibrated around her. Always has been. Childhood made that obvious. She got the celebrations, the soft reasoning, the easy forgiveness. I got the duties and the paperwork. Paperwork. That word has trailed me longer than any memory. When I was 19, Mom handed me a stack of update forms, brushing them off as routine government nonsense. I signed because I believed her. But I never forgot the tiny emblem in the corner, something I didn't fully recognize until years later while filing my own documents in Denver. An insurance company's logo. That moment stayed under my skin, quiet but bruising. Denver gave me room to breathe. I work in analysis, the sort of job that trains you to map timelines, see inconsistencies, and listen closely when someone avoids a detail. It made me sharper, more grounded, better at reading intentions. But none of that prepares you for family. When Mom called about Thanksgiving this year, her tone was too sweet, too staged. She said the whole extended family would gather at Aunt Carol's in Seattle. Cousins, elders, people who thrive on drama. She claimed she had important news to share and needed everyone present. That alone was strange. She hates announcements unless they make her shine. Aunt Carol's place has always felt like neutral ground. Big kitchen, long table, warm lights. A space meant for peace, not interrogation. When I arrived, Mom hugged me first and stepped back with that familiar look, the one she gives when she sees who I've grown into. My cousins were buzzing around the island, and Uncle Mike was already too loud. Everything felt normal except for one detail. Mom's hands kept trembling, smoothing her sleeves, touching her necklace, trying to look sure of herself and failing miserably. Emily came in a bit later. She smiled at me, and I smiled back, though the exhaustion in her eyes told its own story. She's never been cruel, just easily steered, especially by Mom. As we settled at the table, I sensed it instantly. The air shifted. Something was waiting. Dinner had barely begun when the first crack showed. Mom tossed out a comment that was too casual, the kind meant to slip by unnoticed. But after years of hearing the truth between her lines, I caught it instantly. It hit the room like a stone in quiet water. She mentioned finally getting documents processed, then changed the subject. Emily blinked, confused. Mom avoided her gaze. First red flag. The second came minutes later when my cousin, who notices everything, leaned toward me and whispered, "Your mom seems weird tonight." I shrugged, pretending not to care, but I'd seen it too. Mom wasn't touching her food. She kept watching Emily. And every time finances or forms came up, she stiffened. Under the table, I unlocked my phone with my thumb. The email from the insurance company sat exactly where it had been all week. A review notice, pending investigation, documents under verification. Polite wording, but unmistakable. They were examining the claim. The claim Mom had filed. I didn't open the message. I already knew every line. Emily, meanwhile, was starting to see the cracks. She leaned close and whispered, Did Mom say something to you about money? Her voice shook just enough to give her away. She may be the favorite, but she has never been good at hiding confusion. Tonight it was written all over her. No, I said softly. Why? Did she tell you something? She shook her head. She just keeps saying she has a surprise. But I don't know anything about insurance. Insurance. The word dropped heavy, metallic. Third red flag. Around us, the table thrummed on, plates shifting, chairs scraping. Uncle Mike dove into another work story. The older relatives argued about football. Aunt Carol moved dishes around with her usual warmth. None of them sensed the floor beneath us was splitting open. But I felt it, something old and sour rising. And then Mom did it again. She leaned closer to the table and launched into a story about how hard the past year had been for Emily, her voice thick with emotion. She never named the divorce outright, but she didn't need to. She shaped Emily into a portrait of delicacy. Someone wounded, someone deserving, someone who just happened to need exactly what she had already prepared to hand her. And that was when I recognized the sound of it. I'd heard that voice a decade earlier in our old kitchen, the night she slid a pile of forms toward me and insisted I sign before she forgot. I hadn't known what that meant back then, but now I understood completely. Her guilty tone always dipped at the edges, like she was tiptoeing across shards only she could see. And tonight, those shards were practically clattering beneath her steps. I folded my napkin, slow and deliberate, giving myself a moment. The truth was already moving. Nothing could stop it now. Mom was unraveling inch by inch, and the only person in the room who knew exactly what was about to detonate was me. So when she finally raised her glass to announce whatever she had rehearsed, I wasn't surprised. I was prepared. The collapse didn't hit all at once. It arrived in quiet breaks, subtle, undeniable, visible to anyone who bothered to look. She lifted her glass again, trying to reclaim the authority she always assumed belonged to her, but the very first word snagged in her throat. A tiny thing, barely noticeable, but to me it rang like a fracture echoing through crystal. She cleared her throat, forced composure, pasted on a smile that clashed with her eyes. Before we get too far into dinner, she began, I wanted to acknowledge everything Emily has been dealing with. Her gaze swept theatrically toward my sister, who blinked at her like she'd missed a cue. She deserves something good. A fresh start. Emily's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Mom, what are you talking about? Mom ignored her, continuing as though reading from notes no one else could see. Life had been unfair. Things had been difficult. So when the chance presented itself, she'd done what any mother would do. She'd made sure Emily would be looked after. It was a preloaded line, meant to justify whatever was coming. And it wasn't crafted for Emily, it was for the witnesses. But the witnesses weren't on her side anymore. Aunt Carol's eyebrows tightened. My cousin paused mid-chew. Uncle Mike leaned back, giving the moment space. Even the older relatives, those who usually supported Mom out of habit, watched her now with a wary, assessing interest. Emily spoke again, louder this time. Mom, what chance? What are you talking about? There it was. The first true break. Mom tried to keep control. It's complicated, she muttered, flicking her hand in that dismissive motion she always relied on to silence a room. Except it didn't land this time. Emily stared at her, confusion shifting into something sharper. What did you do? I could have stepped in then. I could have laid everything bare. But real revenge, the kind that keeps your hands clean, requires patience. So I said nothing. I let the quiet spread, let it settle heavy over the table. Mom couldn't handle the silence. Her eyes darted to me. Next mistake. Chloe, you understand, right? You know Emily needs support. This isn't a big deal. There was the second collapse, her attempt to drag me into her narrative again. She expected the same unquestioning nod I'd given at 19 when she'd shoved unknown paperwork my way. But I met her stare calmly. Why don't you explain it to everyone? Her breath stumbled. Barely a flicker, but enough. The room leaned toward the center, like a collective inhale pulled tighter. There's nothing to explain, she snapped, but her trembling hands betrayed her. Emily stared at those hands, then at me. Chloe, she whispered. Did Mom file something about Dad's policy? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Silence can speak more clearly than words. Aunt Carol finally intervened, voice low but solid. If there's something happening, this is the time to share it. Not after making decisions behind your daughters' backs. Mom fired back instantly. I wasn't hiding anything. But she had been. And everyone knew it. The room tilted toward confrontation. Mom was cornered, but I wasn't finished letting her reveal the truth herself. I exhaled slowly. We can discuss it, I said calmly. But we should be clear about what was filed, and by whom. Her color drained, just slightly, but enough that I saw it. The pushback had begun, not loud, not cruel, but exact. And for the first time in a long time, she realized she wasn't the only one who understood how forms, dates, and signatures worked. Everything happened quickly after that, though it didn't feel chaotic. More like a stage light rising on a scene everyone had unconsciously stepped into. Mom stood stiff, clutching her glass as though it anchored her, while the entire table held still, waiting for her to say anything that could stitch the evening back together. But the thread was already broken. She opened her mouth. No sound came out. So I rose instead. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Truth has its own volume. Mom, I said evenly, why don't you tell them who submitted the claim? Every bit of sound vanished. Forks hovered. A chair moaned against the floor. Even the warm hum from the kitchen seemed to halt. Across from me, Emily's eyes widened. Filed what? She blurted, louder than she meant to, sharp enough to slice through Mom's brittle composure. Mom whipped toward her. Emily, not now. But Emily pushed her chair back and stood too, the scrape echoing across the table. No. I want to know what she's talking about. What claim? Her voice cracked. Fear, disbelief, betrayal blending into one sharp note. Mom's lips shook. She looked at me with a mix of warning and pleading. Chloe, stop being dramatic. You're confused. I'm not, I said quietly. And you know I'm not. Aunt Carol set her palm on the table. She didn't raise her tone, but her authority filled the space. I think we all deserve to hear the truth. Mom swallowed hard. It's just paperwork. Nothing important. There it was again. Paperwork. The word she always used when she needed one daughter obedient and the other oblivious. I reached for my phone, sliding it from my pocket. My hands were steady. Hers weren't. I didn't plan to do this tonight, I said. But since you brought everyone into it, they should know the truth too. Mom's eyes widened, a startled flicker cutting through her practiced calm. Chloe. I tapped my screen and opened the email I'd memorized over 2 weeks. The subject line alone was enough to still every whisper, every doubt. Review in progress. Claim under investigation. I didn't read the entire wall of text. I only read the parts that mattered. It states, I began, keeping my voice even. The supplementary policy tied to your father's file is currently on hold. A recent submission requires verification due to inconsistencies involving the signature and the listed beneficiary. Ripples of shock moved through the room like a soft quake. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. Mom's grip tightened around her wine glass until her fingers went pale. Chloe, you don't understand how layered this is, Mom said, voice thin. I do, I replied. You initiated the claim. You signed as the contact. You named Emily as the only recipient. And you didn't tell either of us. Uncle Mike leaned forward, eyes narrowing. So only Emily was listed? Mom snapped before he had even finished the sentence. She needed the support. Chloe already has a job, a home, a stable life. Emily has been through hell. Emily sucked in a sharp breath. You did this for me? Without saying a word? You used Dad's name and never even asked. Mom reached for her daughter's hand. Emily pulled back as if burned. Tears gathered in her eyes. Not gentle ones, but the kind born of broken trust. How could you do this behind our backs? How could you twist his memory like that? Mom's reply crumbled. I was trying to protect you. No, I said quietly. You were trying to keep control over both of us. Mom looked at me, really looked, as though she finally saw a version of me she could no longer manage. Why would you go to the company? She whispered. Why would you do that? I met her gaze. Because they contacted me. They needed confirmation. They needed to verify a signature I'd never seen. They needed approval for forms you never mentioned. Just like the ones you pushed in front of me when I was 19. Mom dropped into her chair, shoulders folding inward like something inside her had snapped. Aunt Carol crossed her arms, unimpressed. You altered something, didn't you? She asked. I did not falsify anything, Mom burst out. But the speed, the defensiveness, gave her away. I only handled the details because Emily's had such a devastating year. I thought I could walk her through it later, explain. You weren't going to explain anything, I cut in. You were going to let the money hit her account and hope no one ever questioned it. Mom's breath shook. Emily whispered, voice trembling. So you were going to tell us after everything was already done? After it made me look like I took something I didn't even know about? That hit Mom harder than anything I had said. She flinched, actually flinched. The room simmered, thick with disappointment. Plates sat untouched. No one came to her defense. For once, the silence didn't fall on my shoulders. It fell on hers. I placed my phone down, screen facing her. I didn't come here to shame you, I said. You did this publicly. I'm just answering publicly. Mom blinked rapidly, eyes shining. Everything I did was for this family. No, I said softly. Everything you did was to preserve the image of a family you were never actually holding together. Emily wiped at her cheeks, breath unsteady. I don't want money tied to deceit. That sentence broke something open, not just the tension, but something inside Mom herself. Her posture deflated. Her hands dropped, trembling openly for the first time. I didn't want to hurt you, she whispered, barely audible. I let out a slow breath. Not triumphant. Not angry. Just exhausted. You did. But it doesn't have to stay that way. The room exhaled with me. Aunt Carol reached for my hand beneath the table. Emily let out a shuddering breath. And Mom. Mom finally lowered her head. That was when the shift happened. Not with shouting. Not with accusations. But with truth laid bare in the one place she never thought it would be spoken. Around that long wooden table in Seattle, the authority she'd held for years slipped right through her fingers. And for the first time, everyone finally saw who had actually been carrying the weight. The days after Thanksgiving felt unervingly calm, like the hush after a storm chooses its direction. I flew home to Denver with the same small bag I'd brought, but I carried myself differently. It felt as though I'd finally put down something I'd been hauling since 19. A week later, the insurance company called. Their audit was done. The funds would not be sent to one person. They would be allocated exactly how the original policy intended. Fairly, transparently, without manipulation. The representative apologized for the confusion. I didn't bother explaining that the confusion had never come from their side. Emily called me that night. Her voice was uneven but honest in a way I hadn't heard since we were kids. She told me she confronted Mom, refused the excuses, refused the narrative, refused to be a shield or a tool. She didn't want money rooted in secrets. She didn't want a family built on guilt masked as affection. Then she said something I hadn't expected. Thank you for telling the truth before it swallowed us whole. As for Mom, the fallout was quick. Relatives reached out, not out of gossip, but disappointment. They pulled back from her, giving her space she never asked for but clearly needed. She sent me a short message. Not an apology. More like an acknowledgement that her decisions had consequences she couldn't dodge. I didn't answer with fury. I didn't answer with forgiveness either. Some things settle slowly. What mattered was simple. The lie didn't win. And for once, neither did she. In the weeks that followed, I kept thinking about how a single spoken truth can tilt an entire family. Not a dramatic speech. Not an explosion of anger. Just a clear sentence finally said aloud. For me, that sentence didn't fix the past. But it ended the cycle. And sometimes, that's enough. Sometimes the quietest truth is the one that finally breaks the pattern. If any part of my story felt close to yours, share it below. And if you want more stories like this, make sure you subscribe so you never miss what comes next.